Well, yesterday we told you that the parliamentary hearings by the Heritage Committee, chaired by Hetty Fry, no less, the woman who falsely claimed there were Ku Klux Klan crosses burning in Prince George, I don't know, 15 or so years ago, if you remember that. Well, she is chairing the committee that is doing the hearings into M-103. That is the parliamentary motion against Islamophobia. Yesterday, Iqra Khalid testified. She is the Mississauga area MP who promoted the motion and supported it. Today, our friend Tariq Fatah is in Parliament to give the other side of the story. Joining us now to talk about it is Salim Mansour, a professor at Western Ontario. Great to see you again.
The issue needs to be not only talked in the Parliament, but I think we should be talking right across the country. This is an issue far bigger than the Parliament, where the Parliament stands from the last vote on motion M-103. I believe the number, you can recall the number, it was quite an overwhelming majority of parliamentarians voted for this motion, which is, again, accelerating the path that we are in, the slippery slope, to dismantling the very fundamental principles of a liberal democracy, or classical liberalism, as we talk about, which is based upon individual rights and not collective rights. So, yes, we need a very serious discussion, and we should open it up. And my first observation, Ezra, will be the irony is that we in Canada do not have freedom of speech. In fact, we do not have freedom of anything if we go by the notion of what freedom means and the way it is bound in the Charter of Rights and Freedom, as opposed to what the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, Second Amendment, and so on, provides for or defends, not provide for, but defend. In terms of fundamental principles in the U.S. Constitution.
Our Charter of Rights is more limited, that's true. We do have a tradition of free speech. It goes back centuries to the British tradition of free speech, but I accept your legally accurate, constitutionally accurate point that our freedom of speech is much more limited than the Americans. But there's something particularly tricky about this motion. I mean, it seeks to eliminate Islamophobia using every tool in the government's chest. I mean, the phrase they use is a whole of government approach, but they never define what Islamophobia is, Salim, and that's what worries me. If they were to say Islamophobia means committing violence against Muslims, or even firing a Muslim person for no cause, or refusing to rent public accommodations to a Muslim, I would say, well, that's already covered by the law. So we don't need this new motion. So if it covers things we already cover, it's not needed. But then why are we doing it? It must mean something. Why do they insist on not defining Islamophobia? What would you define it as? What do you think they mean to define it as?
Well, Ezra, in more ways than one, it cannot be defined. That is the dilemma. That's the paradox. I mean, for the proponents of motion 103, and I'm recalling the discussion that took place in the Parliament before they went on the summer recess, was that the intent, and here is the problem, the intent behind this motion is to explore or examine the extent to which systemic racism exists in Canada. And then when it comes to Islamophobia, they say Islamophobia is the irrational fear of Islam or Muslim. But then what is irrational fear? What is about Islam or Muslim that is provoking this irrational fear? That is not discussed. So this is all sleight of hand. I would say that if they were upfront, they would say it would be that there can be no abridgment on the discussion of Islam or Muslim, just as there can be no abridgment on the discussion of any subject. It has to be freely engaged in. And when such discussion, writing, research, media exploration, storytelling. If any of these things become an excuse for some sort of violence, beginning with verbal violence and leading on to physical violence, then that falls in the realm of criminal law. Mm-hmm. So, we make that distinction. But my right to discuss, my right to have a serious research engagement on any topic cannot be a right that can be abridged and taken away by somebody by saying that Salim might have an irrational fear about that.
Yeah, and who decides what is irrational fear and what does not? I was just thinking, it's been 20 years since I went to law school, but we learned a concept called a law might be void for vagueness. And what I mean by that is if a law is so hard to understand that it's impossible for the citizens to know what it means, let alone to follow it, that such a law cannot stand. It is void for vagueness. But there's a countervailing idea to be deliberately vague, to allow every politician, every policeman, every human rights commissar, every censor, every agent of some bureaucracy to give it their own meaning. So I think not defining Islamophobia is essential here so that every activist, everyone with a bee in their bonnet can say, now that M-103 is passed, I can do whatever I want in the name of fighting Islamophobia in my part of the world. Whatever part of the government bureaucracy I'm in, I can give it the meaning I want. I think that void for vagueness, which should kill the law, is especially why they want it void, so 100, 1,000, 10,000 busybodies can now run with it in whatever extremist interpretation they see fit. That's my theory. What do you make of that?
Absolutely, Ezra. But here is the other dimension. In fact, there are so many dimensions that we have to unbundle upon to reach this problem. It rests upon the idea that a collective, after all, the police, the judge, the school teacher, and so on and so forth, they're always people in the mosque, the imam, they're always representing a collective. And the collective then can decide whatever they rule out as protected area that cannot be discussed. And if it is discussed, then it is a violation of whatever principle, in this case, the promotion of systemic racism. Consequently, it is always the denigration, the silencing of the individual. Mm-hmm. There's that fundamental principle is involved. Either we have free speech or we do not have free speech. Yeah. There can be no exception. So when I said in Canada we have no free speech, we have exceptions. Mm-hmm. Same thing in Western Europe. We have exceptions. The only jurisdiction in the world, at least as of now, where there is free speech approaching this notion of ideal free speech, that there can be no exception, is of course the United States with the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. So we entered this slippery slope a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Ezra, I don't have to remind you, when people with very good intention, you see, they talk about intent, so I grant Ikra Khalid good intention. Mm-hmm. I grant the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister good intention. But hell is paid by good intention. Yeah. So people with good intention 50 years ago, 60 years ago, after Second World War, said that we are not going to allow any discussion that in any way, shape, or form gives a pass to the fascists, to the Nazis. In terms of the dress that they wear, the insignia that they show up in public, or start discussing any matter that relates to that terrible ogre called Nazi, Holocaust denial, and so on and so forth. All of this was done with good intention, but a precedent was set in the matter of where to draw the line. Yeah. Once the precedent was set, so you see now 50 years later, people with very good intention, as I said, let's give them the presumption of the benefit of the doubt, good intention. Justin Trudeau comes along and says, there's irrational fear or hatred of Islam and Muslim. They don't define what is irrational hatred or why there should be irrational hatred. From my point, it is very rational to be concerned about Muslims and Islam because of what they have been doing, or at least a segment of Muslims have been doing in the name of Islam. And so it is quite appropriate. In fact, it is the reverse. If you don't have fear of what is happening, you're getting up into a subway and you're confronted with a bomb.
Professor, can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned at the outset that Parliament overwhelmingly supported this motion, and it's true, of course, the Liberals and the NDP. But I saw one poll. I don't remember the polling company off the top of my head. I read about this in the Toronto Sun, that Canadians do not support M-103. Despite the mass of the media coverage being supportive of M-103, this is one of those disconnects between the media political establishment and grassroots Canadians.
You're absolutely right. The majority of the people, 1/4, I would say that, if a serious discussion is held nationally on many of the protected issues in Canada, which have become quote unquote sacred and therefore cannot be discussed, common sense tells us that the majority of people, whether it is covering of the faces, the way, people have gone about enforcing the particular culture in terms of law, so Sharia law, that the majority of Canadians would be opposed to it.
Yeah.
But as I said, that we do not have free speech. It was the Supreme Court Chief Justice of Canada only a few years ago, speaking in the United States after 9/11, pointed out to the American audience that the difference between the Charter of Rights and Freedom and the U.S. Constitution when it comes to freedom, and so the freedom of speech matter, is that Canada does not have unlimited free speech. It is always a case of where to draw the line, and in Canada we limit free speech. We don't have the First Amendment.
Yeah. Professor, really quickly, I was very glad to see Tarek Fatah on the list of witnesses in Parliament. Have you been invited to speak before Parliament on the subject of M-103?
No, and that's what it is. It becomes selective. It is people will be invited who will be on the side of the this proposition. And the irony is, and I don't think we have the time here to discuss it, but I find that the Conservative Party that should have been defending this and raising it into a matter of constitutional issue have basically gone silent.
Yeah, I think they're afraid of being called racist. I think Andrew Scheer is afraid of going against the media party he has on various issues, and that makes me very depressed. Well, Salim, we've got you, and we've got the internet, and we've got the Rebel, and we'll keep on fighting. It's great to have you on the show again. Thanks, my friend.
Keep it going, Ezra. We have to keep the voice going.
We absolutely will. All right, there you have it. Professor Salim Mansour of Western University talking about M-103, the anti-Islamophobia motion.
Hey, if you like that, sign up for my show every day. Click on the screen to subscribe.